Hello loves and welcome to today's video. Another month has gone by, so it is time for a month-end wrap-up for the month of March. In the month of March, I read 21 books for a total of 4,802 pages and 88.6 hours of audiobooks, and my average rating for the month was a 3.65. So we'll start with the lowest rated and make our way up to the best of the month. My lowest rating for the month at 2.25 stars was The Maid by Nita Prose. It's about a maid who works in a hotel and lacks social skills. We'll get to that. And she is basically accused of murdering one of the guests at the hotel, and we have to piece together what actually happened. Okay. So I gave The Maid a 2.25. I have people in reviews saying that this was great neurodivergent representation, and I don't agree. I thought that the character was written in a way that was so grating, and she was so naive, and everybody just took advantage of her. But then there's an epilogue where, spoilers, I'm supposed to believe that she had this huge mastermind plan going on the entire time, when 5 chapters ago she was duped by someone because they were nice to her. Are you kidding me? I hated this. The plot was not only predictable, except for the epilogue where we just completely reversed everything. The characters, some of them were okay, some of the other characters, but the main character who you're supposed to be sympathizing and identifying with was terrible. So 2.25 for The Maid. Next lowest rated, unsurprising because I have a whole rant review, Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I read this book because I was going to a hockey game. I wanted to get some hockey romance vibe. There's like no hockey at all in this book. There's arguably supposed to be also figure skating, but it's so bare minimum. So essentially you have our main character Anastasia and Nate, I think his name was, and they are at a university that has 2 ice rinks because it's a very bougie university apparently. The hockey players' rink, something breaks on it so that they have to share a rink with the figure skaters, and they are angry about it for maybe a week, and then they fall in love and are just having sex everywhere. There were so many conflicts that were introduced in this book and then disregarded within a chapter, or resolved within a chapter, or waved away with a time skip or a single conversation that they had. Found out after I did my rant review this was originally published on Wattpad, which makes so much sense because it came off really episodic rather than being one continuous novel. It was very much like, here's a conflict and it's resolved by the end of this chapter. And then here's a new conflict. Oh, cliffhanger. It's resolved at the very beginning of the next chapter. It very much probably worked better in the Wattpad format, where you would have to wait for a next chapter as an update. I don't think it stands as a published cohesive novel. The characters were all right, the plot non-existent. I guess the sex scenes were a little bit steamy. I've definitely read better elsewhere in books that had an actual plot. Icebreaker, 2.5 for me. Wouldn't recommend it. Next book I read as an audiobook, and that was Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. This is about a vampire who's trying to sell a house that has a ghost in it, and then it goes off the rails from there. There's this whole expansive world of different supernatural beings who are all playing the same gambling game to extend their lives or gain other advantages. I thought this book tried to do too much all at once. It started in one place and ended a completely different book because there were so many characters that got introduced with so many different plot lines going on with each of them, and we really lost the plot on the original introduced character. This felt like a Neil Gaiman book. Honestly, that's the vibe I got from it, but not as well executed as maybe what a Neil Gaiman book could do, and that's coming from me who really is not a huge Neil Gaiman fan. This book was messy, this book was way too long, this book tried to do too much. 2.75. Next, at 3 stars, is Out There Screaming, an anthology of new black horror. This is edited by Jordan Peele from Get Out and Us and Key and Peele. It's an anthology of horror stories by Black authors. I really wanted to love this because I do love horror. I do like reading from authors with different experiences than my own. There were just a lot of, not necessarily misses in this book, just ones that weren't quite as horror as I wanted out of this collection. You'd have all of these stories built up to a horror element and then stop. It really felt like pitches for movies and not fully fleshed movies. There weren't really any that stood out to me. I read this maybe 3 weeks ago and I'm already like trying to remember even a single one of the stories. I love the intention behind of promoting Black horror authors. This one just didn't land for me. Okay, moving on to 3.25 stars. First, we have Quag Keep by Andre Norton. This is the first published Dungeons and Dragons universe novel. The plot of this is essentially you have a D&D group who are transported and become their characters, but they can't remember that they used to be humans, so they have to go on this quest to figure out who they are and their identities. I gave this a 3.25. I thought that there were some interesting concepts here, but I thought that there was too much lore that wasn't properly explained or expanded upon to really get a grasp on what was going on. They introduce a lot of characters, a lot of creatures, a lot of these things that are just not properly explained. If this was book 20 in a D&D series, that would have been fine because you know what you're getting into going in. This doesn't even say on the cover that it's Dungeons and Dragons. It only says it in this little blurb right before the first chapter. This author wishes to express appreciation for Gary Gygax and creator of the wargame Dungeons and Dragons. It's based in the Greyhawk universe, so I think that if this was going to do that and introduce people to Dungeons and Dragons via novel, it should have had a bit more world building in the book itself, especially because for a fantasy, this clocks in very short at only 192 pages. I'm going to keep this on my shelves because I think it's a cool thing to own. And if you are someone who wants to read the first Dungeons and Dragons universe novel, sure, go ahead. It just, as a standalone fantasy, maybe not as good as it could have been. The next 3.25 is Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a horror novel set in Mexico City, I believe it was, in the 1990s. It is about this woman who is a film editor and she gets the chance to meet her very favorite horror movie director, and it turns out that he has kind of cursed himself and some other people by starting a spell on film that never was completed. So he enlists the editor and her friend to try and complete and break the curse. I gave this a 3.25. I didn't particularly connect with the main character very well, and it was a little bit tell don't show. It really could have shown a lot more than it described because it was this film director having to explain to the main character what happened 20-30 years ago. It was just a conversation he had that would go on for pages and pages explaining all of this backstory. This could have benefited from flashbacks so that we actually got to see what happened rather than just being told it. So for me, this was a 3.25. And the last of the 3.25s is Will Save the Galaxy for Food by Yahtzee Croshaw, a satirical sci-fi adventure. So in this book, we are following our main character who I'm trying to think, and I either don't remember his name or we never actually got his name. He used to be a pilot back when space travel was new and exciting, and he was a war hero and helped protect planets. But now there's teleportation, so they don't really need pilots anymore. And all of these pilots basically just do tours for people instead of doing actual flights. So there is this author, Jacques McCohen, who publishes books about the golden years of space travel, and he's very popular, but also he's stealing all of his stories from all of the down on their luck pilots begging for tours. Then our main character is offered a lot of money to pretend to be Jacques McCohen as long as the mobster who's footing the bill doesn't actually find out that he's not Jacques McCohen. He has to try and keep his real identity secret while not pissing off any of the people who hate Jacques McCohen, which is basically all of his friends. So this was a fun little romp, very Joss Whedon-esque is the vibe I got from this. It's very quippy, one-liners, a little bit of a lightly misogynist main character who, like, maybe you could have got away with that a few years ago, but now you're a little side-eyeing it. The plot was fun. It was a little bit of a unique concept, though a 3.25 on that one for me. And I already own the sequel, so I'll probably check that one out as well. All right, the 3.5 average books. The first is Keanu Reeves' Most Triumphant by Alex Pompodamus. This is an analysis of Keanu Reeves' career. It focuses mostly on his movies and it goes in chronological order. I liked that this was more of a film analysis than an analysis of his life because Keanu Reeves is a very private person, so I didn't really want a scandalized biography that digs too much into his actual personal life when he clearly tries to keep that private. So I did enjoy some of the film analysis aspects of it. I've seen like 75% of Keanu Reeves' filmography, so a lot of it I was like, yes, I remember that movie, and I either agree or disagree on your analysis of it. However, there were certain parts where the author tried to assume things about Keanu Reeves' life based on how he portrays certain characters. I wasn't really a fan of that. But then also, the author makes assumptions about Keanu Reeves' career in the future that even 2 years on are already out of date. He mentions that Dogstar's last ever concert was like in 2006 or something, and I'm like, then who did I go see in December? Because Keanu Reeves got back together with Dogstar very recently. And then he also made a comment of like, Constantine would have been ripe for a sequel, but it never happened. And I'm like, John Constantine 2 is like filming and is coming out at some point. So thought that was a little weird. But I did enjoy getting a little bit of analysis of some of Keanu Reeves' less popular films, because obviously you can read about The Matrix, you can read about John Wick, you can read about Bill and Ted even, but some of the more like indie things he did in the 80s before he blew up, I liked that there was a little bit of an analysis of those films. So 3.5 for Keanu Reeves' Most Triumphant. Next, 3.5, we have Nightwatching by Tracy Sierra. This is a 2024 release. In this book, there is a mother who is home alone with her 2 children when she hears this noise and thinks someone is in her house. So she hides in a secret compartment in the wall, has to try and keep herself and her 2 small children quiet so that this man doesn't find them, and is using things to try and draw her and her children out. It was less about being a mystery as to who this man was, and more about how women aren't believed on their own experiences. She gets out like halfway through the book, and then the second half is all about trying to convince people that this actually happened, and other people explaining to her how it couldn't have happened. I give this a 3.5. I did enjoy some of the mystery and intrigue, but like I said, locked in the house thing finished like halfway in, and then it's just people gaslighting her for the rest of the book. I wasn't that much of a fan of the main character either. I was a little annoyed by her basically the whole time. So 3.5 for Nightwatching. It's an interesting concept, but just wasn't for me. Next is The Green Mile by Stephen King. I read this as the result of our scavenger hunt. Our main character in this is a man who works on basically death row. They call it the Green Mile. One of the prisoners that he's responsible of taking care of is this man who's accused of killing 2 young children, but also he's a very naive person, so there's question as to whether he would even have the capability of understanding what he did, and he has like no long-term memory essentially. So that is what I was expecting going in, because that's what I had read. I don't know if this counts as a spoiler or not, because it happens like maybe a third of the way in. If you're worried about spoilers for a Stephen King novel that came out like 30 years ago and also has a major motion picture, skip. I say that a lot. I like talking about spoilers, and I also have a hard time telling what would be spoilers to other people versus what is a spoiler to me. Okay, so it turns out this man has healing powers, maybe? And so the warden, I guess I'll just call him, is like, should we execute this guy who like has healing powers and is basically God? And then there's also a rat that's being trained to do tricks. That's relevant for some reason. I give this a 3.5. It took a while to get me. The beginning was a little weird because this guy kept going on about how he was pissing blood because he had a UTI and just talked about his dick a lot, and I was like, I don't know if I'm liking this. But then the end pulled it together. I did enjoy towards the end, and once they actually introduced the like magical healing powers, thought that was cool. Enjoyed that part of it, didn't so much like the beginning of it before we got to that part. So 3.5 for The Green Mile. Also 3.5 for China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan. This is the second book in the Crazy Rich Asian series, so we are focusing on some of the same characters from the first one, and it is just people being rich in Asia. Really, mostly Singapore, but we're also in China a bit. The main kind of plot of this one is that our main character from the first book has now gotten married, and she finds out that her father is actually a really wealthy politician in China. She flies to China, but then her father starts avoiding her even though he's the one who invited her. And then there's also the side characters' plot lines, which honestly there's so many characters to keep track of. It takes me a while to be like, oh right, this plot line. So that's why it gets really a 3.5 for me. There are so many people to keep track of, and that's not my strong suit. The plot lines aren't the point here. The plot lines are arguably the weakest part of this. I just like rich people being rich. It's kind of fun. So a 3.5 for China Rich Girlfriend. Also 3.5 is the latest BRZRKR comic, which I did get an arc of from NetGalley, so I'm not sure if this is published yet. I think it was published April 2nd. BRZRKR is the comic that was in the first series written by Keanu Reeves. It's about this immortal being who has insatiable bloodlust and the government was trying to control. In this, we get a bit more of a historical perspective of some points throughout history that he was involved in. And as a disclaimer, while this is billed as Keanu Reeves, he didn't actually write anything in this one. He's just, you know, the creator of the world. So he's the creator, but not the author of this one. And there were two main stories here. The first one was really cool. There's a certain panel of this that I sent to a friend and she's like, I want to read that because it was so cool. He's in Atlantis and the king's advisor is summoning an eldritch horror. And then in the second one, he gets kidnapped basically and is being held prisoner, and then he escapes with the leader's wife, and then they fall in love and he has to try and keep himself satiated in terms of his bloodlust so he doesn't turn his bloodlust on her. I didn't like that one so much. I thought that the plotline was an excuse to have nudity in it, so that one wasn't my favorite. But I did like the Eldritch Horror plotline in Atlantis. That was fun, so 3.5 kind of splitting the difference here. Next, at 3.75 is Dead and Gone by Charlene Harris. This is a book in the Sookie Stackhouse series. Are you tired of me saying it yet? In this one, the werewolf and shifter community decides that they are also going to publish that they exist, and it is about the fallout from that. So Sookie's brother Jason, he's married to Werepanther, if I'm correct, and she is crucified behind the bar, so they are trying to figure out whether that was a hate crime because she is a shifter and shifters have just announced that they exist, or whether Sookie's brother killed her for cheating on him or else, etc, etc. So this gets a 3.75 for me. I enjoyed the plot lines about the murder. I thought that was interesting. I enjoyed reading that. And then there is a bit of Sookie's fairy lineage worked into this one in the plot, but 3.75 because I'm here for vampires. This was again a very vampire light one, and I would have liked it more if there's a bit more of that. 3.75, I did enjoy the plot line, but vampires. All right, 4 stars and up. So these are the ones that if you're gonna pick up, they would be my recommendations. The first at 4 stars is The Hidden Oracle by Rick Riordan. This is the first Trials of Apollo book, which is one of the Percy Jackson spin-off series. In this series, Apollo has wronged the gods and has been punished with humanity. He has been turned into a human who is a teenager, and he has to complete trials to regain his godhood. I really enjoyed this one. It's not quite as good as the original Percy Jackson series, but we do have some recognizable characters here. I do like the kind of spoiled brat energy that Apollo brings to the story, and also he does archery, so I was having fun with oh yeah, I do that. That's fun. All right, 4.25. I'm pretty sure this is the highest rating that I have given one of the Discworld novels, and that was Moving Pictures. These are by Terry Pratchett. It is a whole universe at this point, and in this one, essentially, they invent the cinema except they don't really call it the same things. And we follow like their pseudo Hollywood and a main character who becomes a silent picture star and a movie director who's trying to scam people. As someone who studied early cinema, because I have a film degree, and particularly, I don't know why, a lot of my classes covered specifically the transition from silent to sound cinema. So that's like the era that I'm most familiar with, which was kind of paralleled in this book. I had fun with this one. Given how hard I have been trying to enjoy Discworld, I was glad that I finally had one that was a hit for me. So Moving Pictures, Terry Pratchett, 4.25. The next 4.25 is a series I thought I was going to hate, but I begrudgingly am loving, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I can't start a series and then not finish it, so I read ACOTAR because it was my book club's pick for the last month, I think. Do I hate that I loved this? Yeah. It is giving me the same experience I had when I read Twilight in high school, where I'm like, I'm too cool to enjoy this, but I'm enjoying this, and I hate that I'm enjoying this. That is what Court of Mist and Fury was for me as an experience. Kind of spoilers because it's the second in the series, but Feyre captured by Tamlin and then flees to the Night Court with Reeves. I liked all the characters here. I don't have the same kind of level of excitement that I see a lot of people online having. Like, I'm not immediately going out and getting a Bat Boy tattoo. Begrudgingly, I loved the characters. The plot, little weak. Like, again, Twilight vibes, where the plot really not important, mainly just the interactions between the characters is the main point here. So I will probably be finishing this series. And the last 4.25 is Moon of the Crusted Snow by, I should probably have looked up how to pronounce this man's name, Quag Rice. I hope that's how that's pronounced. I did try and look it up, but I'm not always the best at pronunciation even after looking it up. So, Moon of the Crusted Snow. In this, there is a remote Canadian town that has a very large indigenous population, and one day the internet goes out, and the next day the power goes out. And then some formerly of the town kids who went off to university come back with news that the power's out everywhere. The world is essentially without power and people are going crazy. So it is a apocalypse story set in small town Ontario and focusing on an indigenous community and how they come together as a community, or maybe not come together as a community, to help each other survive. I really enjoyed this one. It made me consider becoming a doomsday prepper because I'm like, oh no, what would I do if there was no power, no internet? And I did really enjoy the perspective on how things would go in a community that is not necessarily the American perspective of like what would happen in New York. I really enjoyed this more unique perspective on what would happen in a apocalypse. 4.25, I did really enjoy this one. Now onto the 4.5s. The first 4.5 is Dead 11 by Jimmy Giuliano. This is another 90s themed horror. I do have a whole reading vlog for it, as well as Silver Nitrate if you want to check that out. This is about a little island community that just keeps recreating the same day of the 90s over and over again. And you have this mother whose son died, and she finds the name of this island written in her son's bedroom. So she goes to the island to try and figure out what's going on. And then that mother's brother comes to the island to try and find out what happened to her. So you're following a few different perspectives in time. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that there was some fun kind of 90s things in here. And the mixed media aspects made this a really quick, fun, easy read. So it was a 4.5 for me. Also 4.5, I Survived Capitalism, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt by Madeline Pendleton. This is a memoir / financial advice book. Madeline is a business owner. She's the CEO of Tunnel Vision, and I gotta come back to this later because there is drilling that will not stop. All right, I think the drilling has stopped, and also the sun has come back out from the eclipse. So let's get back to it. I Survived Capitalism, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt, mouthful. It was a memoir about Madeline's life and her growing up in a lower income kind of punk neighborhood. So she talks about the money troubles that her parents had that really impacted how she felt about money in her adolescence, and then the struggles she had learning how to control her finances as an adult, and how she did eventually start her own business. So it was more of a memoir about her life than it was financial advice, but there was some aspects of that in there. It would be interesting if you are looking to start a small business. There were some decent tips in there, but really it was more a memoir. So if you are interested in what is like in California punk scene for the lower income people, that might be interesting to you. Or if you know who Madeline is and are interested in her life like I was, it was a very well written memoir, and I gave it a 4.5. I'm editing now, and I realized that I forgot to mention that early on in this book there is a story that Madeline tells about someone who committed suicide due to financial distress. That's something that would be triggering to you. It might be a good idea to give this one a pass. And the third book that I gave a 4.5 to was The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is about some like Boy Scout who are on an island. I think it was in Canada, if I remember correctly. And then some random man stumbles into their camp who's like clearly very sick, and that sickness starts to spread to other people. I, at the beginning, wasn't sure if I was vibing with it. It very much gave me, what's that one book? It was very much giving me Lord of the Flies at the beginning. Then the horror aspects kicked in, and I did really enjoy those aspects. It was overall a 4.5 for me. It did redeem itself. Kind of reminded me of Camp Damascus. If you liked Camp Damascus, this might also be a good pick for you. And finally, my number one book for the month of March, and I think my first true 5-star of the year, and that was Spy Family Volume 4. In this one, because Anya got her first merit star, they have to follow through on their promise to get Anya a dog, and of course Anya can't pick a normal dog. She ends up falling in love with this dog that's been like specially trained to assassinate, and it was just a little misadventure of Agent Forger trying to stop an assassination from going on, Anya running away, trying to chase this dog, and the mom character whose name I forget, trying to find Anya, who is in the middle of this plot now. I loved this one. It had dogs, so it got bonus points for me. It was really interesting in the different characters' perspectives of this huge plot going on, so there was a driving action more than just slice of life, which I really liked. 5 stars for me for this one. And those are the books that I finished in the month of March. Let me know in the comments down below if you liked any of those books or what the best book you read in March was. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.